Here is our second guest, vegan entrepreneur and impact investor, Claire Smith, who provides ethical investment products and animal-free businesses with networking and funding as CEO of Beyond Investing. She is also president of Beyond Animals, CIO of Beyond VC, and president of the charitable Beyond Foundation. Dr. Stu first met Claire one evening in Geneva many moons ago when she was an institutional investment expert specializing in quant and hedge funds. Claire, Dr. Stu would like to ask you what moved you to enter the space you're in. You certainly were an early mover, but first, what do you make of COP27?
Yeah, COP27. It's great to be on the show, Dr. Stu. Thanks very much indeed. COP27 it's really pertinent actually that we're having this conversation around the time of the COP27 because as you know, and the listeners will come to know, a lot of my investing now is orientated around food, and in particular motivated to some extent by the climate impacts of food. And I'm so pleased to see finally, way too late, or many years after they should have done, the COP27 actually do have a food and climate pavilion now, which is being hosted by some organizations that we also partner with as a firm like ProVeg International, in order to throw the spotlight on the the importance of the food system to climate. So I really hope that this actually does cause people to incorporate thinking around food and climate into their net zero strategies or their investing, and certainly for corporates to direct their investing away from the use of animals. You mentioned I was a vegan entrepreneur, so I've tied my colours to that mast already, and to invest in animal alternatives as well. So I'm very pleased to see the spotlight on this COP 2027, but I do think it is unbelievably overdue.
And for all that, do you see any signs of real progress?
I think that there's already been a certain amount of progress within certain companies that have bothered to do kind of life cycle assessments across their entire businesses. I think it was even maybe a couple of years ago that I understood that Starbucks had done such a such an assessment and found that their largest source of carbon emissions was the dairy milk going into the coffees. And the extent to which people do that analysis, I think, is sometimes, it brings to them a realization as to how, small things, and obviously, it's standard at the moment to still put cow milk in coffee, but things that you consider to be just, well, that's the way it is and it can't change, to actually motivate that change as a simple way for them to reduce their own emissions and carbon footprint, and also land use, water use, all types of other environmental footprints as well. So to the extent that companies are doing this more and more, they may be realizing, because it really is orders of magnitude different, they may be realizing that they could be making a change, and they could be very simple changes, in fact.
You mentioned motivation. Why do you do what you do? Why be a vegan entrepreneur? Why the emphasis on animal?
Well, I mean, it dates back a very, very long time. I'm one of the sort of oldest vegetarians and vegans that I know, in terms of not just age myself, but also in terms of the period of time, because it was in the sort of mid to late 70s that I shifted my diet, even within my family home, as it were, to becoming vegetarian. At which point my mother told me that I was doing my own cooking from this point onwards. And then after that, when my daughter was born, I turned vegan. And that was partly due to her having some milk allergy. So we started to explore plant milks as alternatives for her. But in addition to that, there was, this real kind of empathy towards the situation of cows who don't produce milk unless they've had a calf. There is no such thing as a dairy cow that sort of spontaneously produces milk. So it's been a sort of evolution over my life from being a teenager and finding out about sort of factory farming practices which were coming into the UK at that time, and then through just learning more and more, and being I'm somebody who was definitely motivated by animals and the simple concept of, if I can live my life without doing harm to animals, why wouldn't I do that? I can live perfectly well, and actually, possibly even more healthily. I was also an environmentalist in the 1990s, got involved with some local environmental groups in Hertfordshire, where I was living at the time. And then that continued through into sort of the 2000s, etc. Obviously learning more about the climate issues and the climate crisis. And a real kind of, light bulb moment came on in my head when I was reading material. I think it was possibly the World Watch Institute piece, Goodland and Anhang produced something actually stating that 51% of emissions were coming from animal agriculture. Now, there has been disputes about the data there, but a more recent kind of literature survey kind of normalizing across all of the studies that have ever been done on this by another gentleman called Nick Carter put the number in the sort of high 30%. And so clearly it's a very important contributor, and something that needs to be addressed. So over that period of sort of personal conviction, and obviously, telling people why I'm, people ask, obviously, as soon as they see what you're eating and they ask you why you're not having the steak or whatever, then it's an opportunity, and people deserve an answer if they ask as to why. But from that personal conviction, I came to realize, I guess, in the sort of 2010s, that unless I was in some way successful in shifting, or there was some attempt to shift diets away from the use of animals, then it wasn't just a question of me, of me deciding what I wanted to eat. Other people's choices in terms of what they wanted to eat were going to impact my ability to live on the planet. So that's when it really became much more of a sort of a compulsion on my side to figure out ways that this shift in consumption could be affected. Obviously, one continues with the whole kind of advocacy side of things, but one element of it that I felt was really missing at that time was the investment side, both from the divestment from damaging industries, and people were starting to divest from fossil fuel, but they hadn't been divesting from animal agriculture, and also the more proactive, how do we invest in solutions that make people want to shift their diet, i.e. a vegan product that is healthier for you, clean label, highly, more sustainable, and, bloody tasty. And that was something that was definitely missing in vegan products, up until, pretty recently, frankly.
A whole bunch of questions arise from this. First of all, you were talking about cruelty in rearing animals. How prevalent is factory farming still?
God, it's huge. It's absolutely huge. I mean, 99% of chickens in the US are factory farmed. I believe across Europe, it's at least 90% for most, for most types of animals. And of course, the other thing that we've seen we've seen a huge rise in consumption as a function of factory farming, because it cut meat prices down very, 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 very hard. When I was a child, we would have meat on the table maybe 2 or 3 times a week, not even every day. But now people expect to be able to eat meat at every meal. And another big feature of the last 30 years, I would say, is this inexorable increase in fish farming, as opposed to fish from the ocean, because obviously the fish stocks have been depleted to such an extent that it's hard to actually fish, get fish out of the ocean and that could be put on a plate. So a lot of the fish are farmed, but that's created an even bigger problem, because a lot of the fish who are being farmed are eating other fish, i.e. tiny fish that are just being sucked out of the ocean in order to create a fish meal, which is then fed to other fish and also to other animals. Like, the biggest eaters of fish nowadays are actually pigs, because it's being fed to pigs as an animal feed. Yeah. So this massive depletion of natural resources through this supply chain of having an animal which we eat, but it's eating all these other different animals, and also obviously eating vast quantities of grain, soy and corn, primarily, in order to grow which forests are being cut down. So it's a massive footprint on the planet that actually doesn't provide very much in the way of usable calories. Uses about 80% overall throughout the supply chain, only produces about 18% of calories.
Wow. Is there a hierarchy in terms of emissions from different forms of animal husbandry, rearing, exploitation, for that matter? I mean, which are the worst in terms of emissions
you can look at
and other externalities?
Exactly. You can look at things through different lenses, and I think you do need to look at things through a combined lens. And actually, I ended up in a kind of discussion on LinkedIn just a few days ago about this, because you can look at it from a carbon standpoint, and there you've got the ruminants, who are definitely the ones who are the biggest in terms of the carbon, because of the burping, frankly, the literally the emissions from one end or the other. And so that's that's your sort of your hooved animals, your cows, your sheep, and so meat, particularly sort of beef and lamb, and the dairy industry, obviously, because you have cows living for several years, producing the milk. So those are the ones that are the highest for carbon. They also tend to be towards the high end in terms of land use, because bigger animals eat more. Yeah. But then, you've got, the issue of chickens and the, the vast number, the sort of small animal paradox of, if you're switching from larger animals, but eating the same amount of meat, then you're necessarily killing more smaller animals. So then you have a kind of animal suffering paradox of, if you steer away from the carbon, then you're steering towards, harming many more in terms of numbers of animals. There's also a carbon, footprint evidently from, other types of, not just the CO2, but also things like the ammonia, etc. When you think about the chicken factories, and we won't go into, I don't want to put people off their dinner, but there's definitely other types of greenhouse gases, and there's other impacts as well, water waste, the huge issues in around pig factories, pig installations, where they just literally don't know what to do with these sort of lagoons full of what. It gets sprayed into the atmosphere. It harms the local communities, who are necessarily going to be the poorer and probably coloured communities. So there's a sort of vague racism there in terms of the impacts of animal agriculture. So you must think more sort of holistically, but from a purely kind of climate lens, methane is the biggest issue. Methane is coming out in the sort of emissions from the ruminants, because of the way, obviously that they have the multiple stomachs, and they're sort of redigesting, multiple times. And essentially, that is very frightening from the climate standpoint, because methane is a much faster, it stays around for a short period of time, generally degrades into CO2 after about 10 years. But during that 8 to 10 years, it is warming at around about 83 times the speed of CO2. It has a much greater warming effect. And if there is that acceleration, then the increase in temperature itself kicks off tipping points. And I definitely recommend everybody look into the work of Professor Johan rock strong on this. There are all these various tipping points around the world that get triggered around, the sea not being an effective carbon sink, permafrost, melting, releasing methane, generating bacteria. So that methane problem then gets could get sort of worse and worse, and the ability of the Earth to become a carbon sink is compromised with a rising temperature. So that potential, climate change is not a linear process. I see it as being an exponential process, and we're at the bottom end. We're at the end where it looks linear at this point, but there's the tipping point effectively then creates it into a curve, and then it's an upward spike, and the next equilibrium point could be quite a long way from where we are now.
Look, you've talked quite a lot about traceability. This strikes Dr. Stew as one of the most coherent use cases for the blockchain technology, about which we've spoken so much on the show over the last year, months, and so forth. There's still people who scratch their heads when they speak to Dr. Stew about this and ask, where are the use cases? Well, this is clearly one. If you want to know end to end what's happening with your food in terms of the various inputs and the factors and costs that go into producing it and delivering it. I'm wondering, what can we, to your mind, do to ameliorate or address the issues that you've raised, Claire, short of simply stopping altogether the exploitation of animals?
Well, yes. I mean, I think there is a sort of, there is a simple solution if people choose to take it, which is to make the choice not to incorporate animal products in their diet. And actually, it's pretty empowering. If you're one of these people that feels a little bit sort of helpless in terms of climate change, it's like, none of us operate an electricity generation plant. So telling people, oh, we need to switch away from fossil fuels or something like that. None of us, or very few of us, actually have any power to influence that decision making. And in addition, it's decisions which can only be played out over a long period of time. And I do genuinely believe we don't have a very long period of time to address this. So the shift from using animals is something that can be accomplished a lot more quickly. And why? Because as a person, you get up in the morning and the first thing maybe you put on your coffee, your first choice of the day is, well, what milk do I put in my coffee? Then maybe, normally you set up the fryer to cook some eggs. Well, you could have some porridge instead, with a plant milk or something else, or one of the many egg substitutes which are now on the market. So there are. And then, continuing over the course of your day with whatever snacks, lunch, dinner, whatever else you're eating, that there's a choice there that you can make. And that collective action, I mean, it's the principle of democracy that the collective, can actually determine what happens in society. But then, and this is something, an analysis that I did also in my own life. There was my own personal consumption. There's obviously trying to influence others. And then there was this aspect around money as well. And frankly, what gets financed gets done. And, if a startup gets financing or a growth stage company, which has already got traction, gets more financing in order to increase its sales are leading to an increased impact, because it's not as if, the 7 billion people on this planet are suddenly going to start eating 6 meals a day instead of 3. The way that this shift occurs, any choice to eat a plant-based product is probably replacing whatever the meat product or dairy product might have been, which was center of plate or an ingredient or, topping up the coffee. So the finance definitely has the ability to leverage and to accelerate the transition, and that's something I've been saying for some years now. And it can be catalytic. Certainly the first investments that I made in 2016, 17, 18, well, and subsequent, because I continued to seed companies through to 2020. Those types of investments are catalytic because it's very binary. If you seed a company, that company didn't exist before, now it does exist. One of my companies is, having got its pea-based milk into every single supermarket chain in the UK, is now going into Germany, and in the last month has launched in 2 of the major German supermarkets as well. So there's that very small investment initially, just getting that company off the ground, and then talking to other investors about what that company was doing, working with other partners to ensure that that company continued to get capital, is now leading to what is a sort of multi-million revenue company, which looks likely to see doubling revenues in the next year, and hopefully obviously onwards and upwards.
Well, that is really interesting indeed. And next time you come on to the show, Claire, something that Dr. Stew would like to do is to take us, in a sense, further up the hierarchy in terms of finance, and look at the extent to which the larger institutional blocks out there are, to one extent or another, mobilized or not in the right direction with all of this. We don't have time to do that now, but I liked what you just described about the progress of the pea-based milk company. And if people are what they drink as opposed to simply eat, then you are helping to turn not only the UK, but the Germans green, although they've already got Greens in government as it happens. And it's just a shame that time has slipped away, Claire. Far too fast.
We've left it on a cliffhanger there. We've left it on a
there
cliffhanger,
we have.
and
there we have.
a kind of a hook to pick up on in the
Indeed.
in the next opportunity. So
you'll have to
thank
come
you
back
very
on.
much for today, and look forward to having that chance to speak again.